mirror in the current. We had been walking for hours through the dense, wet undergrowth of the forest, the canopy above blotting out what little moonlight might have guided us. Every step sank slightly into the mossy floor, releasing the heavy, earthy scent of damp decay. Somewhere upstream, a river murmured, a soft, insistent whisper beneath the hushed rustle of leaves. My friends moved ahead, careless laughter bouncing off the trunks. But I lingered, drawn by a sudden shiver that danced along my spine. The forest felt alive, its breath pressing against my neck, watching in patient silence. When we finally reached the riverbank, the moon broke through a thin veil of clouds, casting a silver ribbon across the water's surface. That's when I saw it, a figure, sitting at the edge of the river, perfectly still, its head tilted as though listening. The hair was long, dark, plastered against its shoulders, indistinguishable from the shadows around it. At first, I thought it was one of my friends trying to scare me, but then I noticed the reflection. The figure's image in the water was wrong. Instead of sitting, it stood, rigid and impossibly tall, a faint halo of phosphorescent light outlining it in the rippling current. Every detail, the curve of its shoulders, the angle of its jaw, the fingers of its hands, was identical, yet the posture was unnatural, asserting a dominance the sitting figure could not physically achieve. I froze. The sound of the river seemed to swell, a low, resonant hum vibrating through the soles of my boots. It wasn't the current, it was something beneath it. The water pulsed, subtle at first, then insistently, like a heartbeat too slow for a human chest. And for a moment, I felt it. The river was alive. Not with fish or frogs or the ordinary pulse of forest water, but with intention, a sentience older than the trees lining its banks. It watched us. I whispered for my friends to look, but they laughed nervously, shaking their heads. "It's probably just a deer or some log," one said, but my eyes were fixed on the reflection, and I knew it wasn't a trick of light. The standing figure moved its head slightly, and though the sitting form remained inert, the reflection inclined toward us. A message, perhaps, a warning. I stepped closer, boots sinking into the soft mud, and the air thickened. The river's surface rippled despite the absence of wind, concentric circles spreading out from the reflection, brushing against the sitting figure. And then the smell came, a faint metallic tang, like iron and old rain, the scent of something buried long ago and disturbed now by our presence. The sitting figure's face came into view. I couldn't see its eyes, hidden under the shadows of its hair, but I felt them, like twin black holes staring directly through me, probing the edges of my mind. There was a familiarity in its features, not of recognition but of memory, as if the river had plucked fragments of me from the past and assembled them into a vessel. I wanted to speak, to demand it stand, to reconcile the image in the water with what I saw in the forest. My voice caught in my throat. When I finally managed a whisper, it didn't answer. And yet, the reflection in the river shifted, the standing figure raising a hand slowly, deliberately. Its gesture wasn't threatening, at least not in the sense I could understand, but it was an invitation. The river's current quickened, curling around rocks and roots, pulling at my boots. My friends noticed the shift then, the unnatural tension in the water, and one of them shouted, but the sound seemed to sink before it could escape. The forest swallowed it, a vacuum that pressed in from all sides. I leaned closer to the reflection, compelled despite the screaming alarm in my mind. The water was impossibly still beneath the moonlight, an infinite mirror reflecting not just the figure but fragments of the forest behind me. Fragments of my own face blended into the shadows. A distortion in identity, a mirror that did not lie but revealed. I thought I saw my own eyes in the standing figure, staring back at me from across a threshold I could not cross. The figure shifted again. Its reflection bent backward, elongating unnaturally, fingers scraping the surface of the water, sending ripples across the sitting form that didn't move. For a heartbeat, I swore the reflection smiled. But when I blinked, it was gone. The river stilled, sucking in the sound of the forest, leaving only the faint lapping of water against the bank. I staggered back, but my feet felt heavy, as though the mud itself had decided to trap me. And then I saw them, small disturbances, almost imperceptible, rising from beneath the surface. Shapes, pale and sinewy, curling like roots, or perhaps the fingers of something long drowned. The reflection had been a lure, or a message. I could not tell which. My friends grabbed me, pulling me away. Their hands were warm, trembling, grounding me. But even as we ran, I could not tear my gaze from the river. Every shadow along the bank seemed to ripple with intent, leaves moving against the wind, branches bending toward the water. The forest followed us, patient, silent, and the whispering pulse of the river lingered in my ears, a rhythm I could not shake. We stopped at the crest of a ridge, catching our breath, hearts hammering. The moon had slipped behind clouds again, and the river was nothing more than black glass in the distance. My friends laughed shakily, trying to dispel the fear, but I could still see it, just beneath the surface. The standing figure, perfectly still, waiting, its eyes now unmistakably my own. I think it wants something, I said, voice trembling. My friends looked at me like I had lost my mind, but I knew better. The forest was ancient, older than any trail, older than the river itself. It did not forgive trespass lightly, and it did not need to speak to communicate. The reflection had shown us our place in the story, ourselves, fractured, mirrored, and vulnerable. We turned to leave, but the forest seemed to lengthen behind us, the paths twisting where none had existed. I dared not look back, yet the image of the standing figure haunted my peripheral vision. I sensed it rising from the riverbed, not in the way water rises, but in the way inevitability does, patient and exacting. Hours later, or perhaps only minutes, the river was still visible, black and silent, hiding what lay beneath. We did not return the next day, nor the day after. But every time I close my eyes, I see the reflection. It stands while I sit. It watches while I flee. And I understand, with a chill that burrows deep, that the reflection was not a mistake. It was a message, not a warning, not a deception, a summons. Something waits in the current. Something older than the forest, older than the river, older than memory. And one day it will rise. The Smoothwood. The forest had started as any other. Moss-draped trunks, the smell of wet loam, a light drizzle making the leaves glisten like green glass. We had followed the trail deeper than we planned, laughing at our own foolish confidence, noting how the paths narrowed, how the light dimmed under the heavy canopy. The birdsong thinned, replaced by the occasional snap of a twig and the subtle sigh of the wind moving through the leaves. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. One tree, then another, its bark unusually clean, almost polished, as though scraped by some enormous hand. I ran my fingers across a trunk. The surface was warm beneath my palm, slick in a way bark should never be. "That's odd," I said, and the others nodded, uneasy. But the deeper we walked, the bark disappeared entirely. Trees stood like massive pillars of pale, glistening wood, smooth as skin, unbroken by knots, scars, or age rings. They were tall, impossibly uniform, and their surfaces radiated a subtle heat that made the air shimmer faintly. I recoiled, the hairs on my arms standing. "Does this feel alive to anyone else?" I asked, but my voice sounded weak even to me. A branch brushed my shoulder as I moved, though no wind stirred. My friends froze. The touch was almost teasing, light, deliberate, but it carried weight, as if the tree itself had noticed our presence. We had no clear path, but the trees seemed to bend subtly toward one another, forming corridors that guided us deeper into their domain. "Maybe it's some kind of disease," someone muttered. But even as they spoke, the forest shifted. One tree leaned inward, its smooth trunk stretching toward another. Between the two, a gap widened, a doorway or an invitation. The air inside smelled sweeter, heavier, like sap warmed in the sun, though the sun itself did not reach us. We moved, almost without choice, toward it. The ground underfoot was soft, not with moss, but with something springy, almost yielding, like the forest had replaced soil with a living carpet. Every step sank slightly, and the sound was muffled, as though swallowed by the trees themselves. I could feel eyes watching, though we had not seen another living thing for hours. The trunks themselves seemed deliberate, purposeful. Some curves were too exact, bends that a tree could never achieve naturally. Sometimes, from the corner of my vision, I thought I saw them twitch. Not leaves, not branches, but the smooth surfaces themselves, flexing, undulating like the hide of some great creature. A breeze or thought, perhaps, passed through the glade, and the warm sheen of the trees shifted with it. I touched one again. It yielded slightly, almost as if acknowledging me, a response far too aware to be mere wood. My fingertips pressed against the surface and sank a hair's breadth. Something pulsed beneath, a rhythm I couldn't place, like a heartbeat too slow for a human body, too deliberate for anything I knew. I called out to the others, trying to rationalize what we were seeing. "Look, there's nothing wrong. Just, it's smooth." But my voice sounded hollow, swallowed almost immediately. When I turned, they were no longer walking beside me. Their forms flickered in and out of view, shadows shifting between the pillars. Panic rose, but the corridors had lengthened, the trunks now forming walls we could not leave. The smell changed. Gone was the damp rot. In its place was a scent of warm flesh, subtle and intoxicating, faintly sweet, almost medicinal. My stomach churned, and I realized with a sudden clarity that the forest was not merely alive. It was aware, watching, guiding, herding us toward something. A sound broke the oppressive quiet. A low groan, deep and resonant, emanating from the smooth trunks themselves. It was not wind, not animal. The sound carried intention, like a warning or perhaps a greeting. The surface of a tree near me shimmered as if wet, though it was dry, and then a faint movement traced down its length, like veins pulsing just beneath skin. I stumbled back. "We need to leave," I whispered. But even as the words left me, the forest rearranged itself. The corridors twisted, turning back upon themselves. Nothing familiar remained. The moss, the leaf litter, even the light, the dim glow had disappeared. All that remained were these smooth, warm pillars, stretching endlessly upward, and the feeling that we were no longer intruders but prey. We tried to keep moving, following instinct more than reason, but every turn brought another corridor, another stretch of unbroken wood, the surfaces now almost luminous in the dimness. I glimpsed shapes between the trunks, shadows that mimicked our movements, stretching too long, bending impossibly, then vanishing when we looked directly. They were echoes, mirrors, or perhaps predators studying us. Then I noticed something. The roots. They did not anchor into the earth. At least not entirely. In some places, they lifted slightly, curling upward, writhing in a subtle, deliberate motion. The forest's floor quivered beneath them, as if whatever lay below stirred in anticipation. I felt it, not with my eyes, but with the pulse of the forest itself. It was waiting, patient, immense, and older than anything I could imagine. I wanted to scream, to turn, to fight, but movement drew us further in. The air grew warmer, closer, almost suffocating, and the trunks pressed subtly around us. A brush of a smooth surface against my arm was enough to make my blood run cold. I could not tell where the tree ended and the forest beneath began. The light shifted. A faint glow appeared along the base of the pillars, faintly phosphorescent, pulsing in the same slow rhythm as the tremors beneath the surface. I realized then the trees were not trees. Not entirely. They were the surface of something far greater, some hidden body or organism that spanned the forest like a living architecture. And whatever it was, it had been waiting, molding itself, shedding its bark to show us the truth of its form. I turned to warn the others, but they were gone. Only the corridors remained, stretching endlessly, the smooth pillars warm and shifting under my hands. A sound rose from below, a low vibration that resonated through my bones. Roots flexed in answer, trunks quivered, and the air thrummed with a presence I could neither see nor escape. And then I understood. The forest had not mistaken us. It had not been coincidental that we walked this far. We had been herded, curated, guided along the corridors of its smooth wood until we reached the point where the disguise no longer held, where the forest shed its bark, its pretense, to reveal what it truly was. Something ancient, something waiting. I did not know if it was conscious in the way we understand consciousness, or simply a force of instinct and age. But I knew, with a terror that rooted me to the spot, that it had been waiting beneath the surface all along, and the trees, the smooth, warm, deliberate trees, were only the heralds of what lay beneath. The corridors twisted again, subtly, impossibly, and I could hear the forest sigh, a sound like exhalation through stone and sap. It was aware I was here, and it was patient. I ran, or tried to. Every step sank into that living floor, and every trunk brushed against me with intentional weight. Behind me, a low groaning grew louder, closer. Shapes beneath the smooth surfaces wriggled faintly, faint ridges forming and disappearing like breathing. I stumbled over roots that should not have moved, and in that moment, I saw a trunk shift entirely, curving down toward the forest floor, exposing a hollow beneath that pulsed like a great mouth waiting for something. I fled blindly, branches pressing against my face, the warmth of the wood brushing my skin as if trying to stop me. Behind me, the groaning deepened, resonating through the smooth pillars, the air thick with anticipation. I did not look back. I do not know if my friends survived, or if they too were guided deeper into the heart of the smoothwood. I ran until the canopy thinned and the air cooled, until the smell of earth replaced the sickly warmth. I emerged onto a familiar trail, though hours or days must have passed. The forest behind me was silent again, distant, as if it had never moved. But I knew. The smooth wood waits. Beneath its polished pillars, it stirs. Beneath the forest skin lies something alive, patient, and deliberate. And I know that one day, it will stretch upward again, shedding its disguise, and the forest will watch and guide, and wait for the next who walk too far.